On another trip, the government of Indonesia gave us these gifts, and they're our friends. Actually, I love this shirt. I finally found something louder than Sam Donaldson. And speaking of the press, remember during the Contra Aid vote when the networks wouldn't let me on the air? I bet you wondered how I finally got my message out. It's no secret that the press and I sometimes don't get along. In addition to my standard ploy of using helicopter noise to avoid reporters' questions, I've now added a new method to avoid questions: tear gas. I've loved almost every minute I've been in office, although there were a couple of trips to the hospital. In case you're wondering what happened here, I had just said, "So, Don, you say you're going to write a book." One of my greatest enjoyments is talking to the young men and women who defend us from attack. Here I am on top of the White House, and the soldier is explaining where he thinks the next book will come from. It's fortunate that not everything has been spilled in these books, however. I hope the environmentalists never find out about this one. We used to fly Air Force One over Wyoming low and shoot buffalo from the window. But I'll tell you someone I trust totally, George Bush. He's been a wonderful vice president, and he'll make an excellent president. And that's why I endorsed him and why I'll work hard for him this fall. Here we are listening to one of his speeches. You here tonight do good, hard, creative work, and I respect that too. So, as we say our farewells here tonight, this salute's for you. Now, thank you very much, but I think George and I should be applauding you. I thought it'd be good to get together now that we've all rested from our summer vacations. Although it's true summer vacations aren't always restful, you know that leads to a story. There was a fellow that was on his way to a mountain resort, and a policeman stopped him and said, "Did you know that you're driving without taillights?" And the driver hopped out of the car. He was so badly shaken that the officer took pity on him and said, "Well, now, wait a minute, calm down. It's not that serious an infraction." The fellow said, "It may not mean much to you, but to me it means I've lost my trailer, a wife, and 4 kids." I was in Las Vegas some years ago to address the annual Farm Bureau meeting. And on my way to the hall, a fellow recognized me and asked what I was doing in Las Vegas. And I told him I was there, what I was there for. And he said, "What are a bunch of farmers doing in a place like Las Vegas?" And I couldn't resist. I said, Buster, they're in a business that makes a Las Vegas crap table look like a guaranteed annual income. You know, there's a story about a pig and a chicken. They got tired of farm life, decided to find jobs in town. They no sooner arrived in town when the chicken spotted a sign in the window of a restaurant. It said ham and eggs, $1.25. The chicken suggested they go in and apply. And the pig said, wait a minute. For you, this job only requires a contribution. For me, it's a total commitment. You know, I can't resist. I'm accused, and certainly some elements accuse me of too much of telling anecdotes and so forth. But I think it'd be appropriate before I say anything else that one of my favorite stories about government had to do with an employee who sat at a desk and papers came to his desk. He read them and determined where they were to go and initialed them and sent them on. And one day a classified document came there, but it came to him, so he read it, initialed it, and sent it on. 24 hours later, it came back to him with a note attached that said, you weren't supposed to see this. Erase your initials and initial the erasure. But even Howard Baker's writing a book about me. It's called 3 by 5, The Measure of a Presidency. Mike Devers, in his book, said that I had a short attention span. Well, I was going to reply to that, but oh, what the hell, let's move on to something else. Now, George Bush is doing well. George has been a wonderful vice president, but nobody's perfect. I put him in charge of anti-terrorism, and the McLaughlin Group is still on the air. But with so much focus on the presidential election, I've been feeling a little lonely these days. I'm so desperate for attention, I almost considered holding a news conference. I've even had time to watch the Oscars. I was a little disappointed in that movie, The Last Emperor. I thought it was going to be about Don Regan. Now, one example is a story they tell. You know, you have to wait 10 years there for delivery after you order an automobile. And so a fellow had finally gotten the money together and was going to buy an automobile. Only about 1 out of 7 families have them in that country. And he went through all the paperwork and everything and finally signed the last paper, laid down his money, and then the man behind the counter said, come back in 10 years and get your automobile. And the man said, morning or afternoon? And wait. The fellow behind the counter says, well, what difference does it make 10 years from now? And he said, well, a plumber's coming in the morning. I know that some of you are no beginners when it comes to writing headlines. Reminds me a little bit of a cub reporter. You knew that something would remind me of a story. A cub reporter whose first solo assignment was interviewing a fellow who was just going to have a birthday that made him the oldest person in town. And he got to the address. It was an older building out in the outskirts of the city, and an elderly gentleman ushered him in. He sat down, and the reporter determined he was the man, and he said he was there for the interview, and he led right to the matter about how old are you, and the man said 96. He said, to what do you attribute your longevity? And the fellow said, I don't smoke, drink, or run around with wild women. And at that moment there was a crash from upstairs, and the reporter looked up and he said, what was that? The old boy said, oh, that's Dad, he's drunk again.
You know, there was a time that being a Republican in this area of the country felt a little bit like being Gary Cooper in High Noon, outnumbered in a big way. I remember the story of the fellow here a while ago who was running for Congress as a Republican. He stopped by a farm to do some campaigning, and when the farmer heard he was a Republican, his jaw dropped, and he said, "Wait right here." He said, "While I get Ma. She's never seen a Republican before." So he got Ma, and the candidate looked around for a podium to give his speech from. The only thing he could find was a pile of that stuff that Bess Truman took 35 years trying to get Harry to call fertilizer. So he got up on the mound, and when they came back, he gave his speech. End of it, the farmer says, "That's the first time I've ever heard a Republican speech." Candidate said, "That's the first time I've ever given a Republican speech from a Democratic platform." It can be best described in a story I like. Three fellows that went out of the building to get in their car and found they'd locked the keys in. They were locked out. And one of them said, "Get a wire coat hanger, and we straighten it out, and I can get the..." And the other one says, "You can't do that. Somebody think we're stealing the car." And the third one said, "Well, we better do something pretty quick because it's raining, starting to rain, and the top's down."
This convention brings back so many memories to a fellow like me. I can still remember my first Republican convention. Abraham Lincoln giving a speech that sent tingles down my spine. No, I have to confess I wasn't actually there. The truth is, way back then, I belonged to the other party. Seems that 25 of San Francisco's top bootleggers. This is a little story to illustrate what I've just said about candor. They were arrested back there in those days of the Volstead Act, and as they were being arraigned, the judge asked the usual question, of course, about their occupation. And the first 24 were all engaged in the same professional activity. Each claimed he was a realtor. And then he got to the last one, the 25th, and says, "And what are you?" He asked the last prisoner, and the fellow says, "Your Honor, I'm a bootlegger." And the judge was surprised, but he laughed, and he said, "Well, how's business?" He said, "It'd be a lot better if there weren't so many realtors around." President Alfonsine and I have much in common. We both have gone through many campaigns and asked for votes from many different kinds of people. Down in Texas during the 1976 primary, they had me out knocking on doors. And I remember one kind of rural area. I'd been governor of California, but I wasn't all that well known in Texas, and I knocked on the door, and an old fellow in his undershirt and jeans came to the door, and I told him I was running for president, and having been in the occupation I'd been in for a number of years, I was kind of surprised when he asked me what I'd done for a living. And I told him I'd been an actor, and then he asked me what my name was. And I thought, well, maybe if I give him a hint. And so I said, well, my initials were RR. And with that, a face lit up, and he turned and he ran back into the house, and he was yelling, "Ma, Ma, come on out here quick. Roy Rogers is outside." So, of course, asking for help suggests a certain degree of trust, which reminds me of a story. It has to do with a fellow that fell off a cliff, and he grabbed a limb on the way down, and there he hung, dangling above the rocky canyon, and he looked up and didn't see anyone, and he finally shouted out, "Oh, Lord, if you're up there, tell me what to do." And a moment later, a voice came booming down from the heavens that said, "If you have faith, let go." Well, he took another look down at those rocks 200 feet below, then looked up again and says, "Is there anyone else up there?"